Every empire thought trade was just trade, until it learned trade is power because flow can be priced, delayed, or denied. That's the system. Routes, schedules, permissions, and gatekeepers. One ship stuck in one canal showed the truth in real time. No armies, no missiles, just a choke point. And the world's schedule froze. And when the schedule freezes, the empire starts bleeding confidence. That's the secret. Power isn't in the sword, it's in the flow. If you know who can delay or deny flow, you can see power shifting before the headlines do. That's the system that turned trade into power. So if you want financial history documentaries that show how boring systems become, weapons, subscribe now. Because this system is why every empire collapses the same way. Let's start. An empire isn't born with a sword, it's born with flow. Look at Rome. When they laid the Appian Way, the public story was move legions faster. But the real intent was bigger. Guarantee that grain, silver, and taxes flowed to Rome on Rome's terms. The road looked like a military tool, but it functioned like an economic valve. A system that decided what moved, when it moved, and who paid for the movement. Britain's naval dominance worked the same way. Under the language of free seas and security, control meant tempo, ports, convoys, insurance, customs, enforcement, choke points, shipping lanes, tea, sugar, cotton. It didn't just arrive in London, it arrived through a system that made London the gate. Now look at centralized systems like the Soviets. People argue ideology, but the practical mechanism was production and distribution. Who got fuel, who got steel, who got rail capacity, who got priority, who had to wait. If you can decide who waits, you can decide who grows. It's not flashy, but it's brutal. Modern empires still start here, but the tools changed. Today, it's not only roads and fleets, it's ports, container schedules, shipping insurance, trade finance, payment rails, standards, data, and the quiet paperwork that can say yes or no without firing a shot. Think about a single container. It's a metal box, right? But that box is wrapped in permissions. A carrier needs a slot, a terminal needs capacity, customs needs documents, insurers need a route they'll cover, banks need the invoice to clear, compliance teams need the counterparty to pass screening. If one layer says no, the box becomes a statue. That's why trade is free is a myth in practice. Trade is a checklist, and whoever influences the checklist influences the world. Now layer that onto modern systems people don't even call empires, but that behave like them. A platform ecosystem. If attention stays inside the platform, money stays inside the platform. The tool is not a sword, it's a feed. A payment network. Every swipe is a toll. The tool is not conquest. It's a fee and a rule book. A logistics network. A 2-hour delay in one hub can ripple into deliveries across an entire region. The tool is not a tank, it's timing. The two faces of flow. Whoever controls flow wins two things at once: wealth and dependence. Rome gathered wealth and became dependent on Egyptian grain. Britain gathered wealth and became dependent on its trade web and colonies. Modern giants control ecosystems and depend on concentrated production, minerals, routes, and rules. The math stays the same. Who moves what when and at what cost? Rome's roads weren't dirt roads. They were tax corridors. Britain's ships weren't wood. They were customs gates. Today's cables and rails aren't just tech. They're pipes of attention, money, and permission. And here's the line that ties directly to the title. Trade becomes power when flow becomes permission, and empires collapse when they get addicted to that permission. Because the one who controls flow eventually becomes dependent on flow, and dependence is where fragility begins. In modern logistics, managers wake up before sunrise because the system has to hit the number. It looks like a Flex, the biggest delivery network on Earth. But it's really a dependence machine. When the system misses timing, the penalties aren't just late boxes, it's reputation, revenue, and market confidence. Rome's commanders woke up before sunrise too, because supply lines had a clock. If grain was late, people went hungry. Armies didn't fight only for conquest, they fought to protect the convoy, and when a key supply relationship shifted, the stomach of the empire emptied first. Then the discipline cracked. That's the paradox. The bigger you get, the more you get chained. Every new connection is a new failure point, every new port is a new border to defend. Every new partner becomes a customer you can't afford to lose. And here's the betrayal of growth. What starts as an advantage can turn into a cage. An infrastructure standard can feel like dominance, until the entire ecosystem plugs into it. A platform can feel like control, until the platform must keep serving everyone to keep itself alive. A global web can feel like power, until the web becomes too tight to reroute. Empires are often weakest at their peak, not because they're small, but because they're tied to everything, while nothing is tied only to them. Growth doesn't end in freedom, it ends in timing pressure. And a small delay can stop the whole clockwork, and it's not only states and mega companies that feel this. You feel it too. Your credit card bill depends on the bank's flow, your salary depends on your employer's cash flow, your internet depends on infrastructure flow. As you grow, more income, more responsibility. Your cage grows too. Then one small glitch: payroll hits late. A bill spikes. Access tightens and the whole tower shakes, because dependence isn't just needing something. Dependence is when timing controls you, so how do you escape the vice? Not through more efficiency, but through buffers, because dependence is where fragility is born, and buffers always get cut as luxury, because short-term profit ends up buying long-term life. In the modern supply chain era, the global machine ran on a simple religion: no stock, only speed. Then one pause, one choke point, one shortage, one shock, and entire industries discovered they were living on a timer. And when energy systems tighten, when credit tightens, when routes reprice overnight, the same truth appears. A buffer isn't waste. It's breathing room. A backup source isn't extra bones, it's insurance. A slower tempo isn't falling behind, it's flexibility. The price of worshiping efficiency is always the same. You buy fragility, and history keeps punishing that worship. Rome learned this through supply strain, administrative overreach, and the deadly confidence that we can cut the extra capacity. When slack disappears, the system looks strong right up until the day it isn't. Modern systems repeat the same logic in a cleaner outfit. We'll forecast demand. We'll optimize inventory. We'll tighten timelines. We'll cut redundancy. And then when routes stall and lead times stretch. The forecast doesn't save the calendar. Empires repeat the same error in every era. They buy fragility in the name of efficiency. They raise risk in the name of speed. They erase buffers in the name of profit. Then a small hit: one ship tilts, one pipe bursts, one model misses, one rule changes, and the giant falls like an old tree. Breakdowns look sudden, but they're usually the last hit after years of quietly stacked fragility. Even modern finance repeats the same story. Optimize returns, compress safety margins, assume liquidity stays permanent. Then one shock hits, and the system discovers what it traded away. So, why do buffers always get cut as luxury? And that's how fragility turns into collapse without anyone noticing, because fragility is invisible to the controller until their own fortress cracks. And while it cracks, the people inside still say, "Temporary problem." Here's where empires get trapped by their own power. When a modern power tightens control over a platform, a payment path, a standard, or a route, it's usually framed as security. But tightening control does something predictable. It creates hunger for alternatives. The moment you cut flow, you create a backup race: action and reaction. Rome fell into versions of this trap. Britain did too. Control teaches the controlled how to survive without you, and that's how parallel systems are born. This is the lasso theory. Control is like a lasso. The tighter you pull, the more fragile you become. All roads lead to Rome sounds like dominance until you realize maintenance, security, and capacity become Rome's burden. One bridge collapses, one road breaks, and Rome's voice cuts out. The seas are free. Sounds like power until holding the lanes becomes a permanent cost, and a shifting port map changes the game. Modern permission layers work the same way. Approved, denied. Cleared, flagged. Insured, uninsurable. Funded, frozen. And here's the brutal part. A system can freeze without a single container being touched because paperwork can stop motion. Control is not flexibility. Control is resisting change. Control is leaving no alternative, but the world changes, and if you can't change, your own lasso tightens around your neck. The biggest illusion is this. From the inside, collapse never feels sudden. Just a bit of slowing, you say, while outsiders watch a sudden fall. In 2024, a CEO opens the morning meeting with the report. Growth is 2%, target was 5%. Temporary fluctuation, will recover by year end. But complaints rise, morale drops, costs climb, approvals slow, inventory timing stretches, from the inside, just a little slow down. From the outside, the company is dying. Late empires talk the same way. Temporary pressure, temporary unrest, temporary disruption, temporary inflation, temporary measures. The permanence of temporary is the biggest shield of collapse, and from the outside, collapse isn't sudden, it's accumulated. That's why the pattern repeats. Control, dependence, fragility, collapse every time, in every empire, in every system. So the question is, which gate controls your flow right now? Are you still saying temporary, or are you looking for a new road? Good. Hold that question because it's not philosophical, it's practical. Admitting the truth forces painful choices, cutting costs, changing routes, paying more, building redundancy, slowing down, and nobody wants to be the person who says, we accept less comfort now, so we don't get crushed later, so the system keeps moving until it can't. Now, let's bring this back to the world you actually live in, because this is where the Vise gets personal. Most people think they're outside these forces. They think empires are back then, and supply chains are for companies. But you're inside the same mechanics every day, only your version is smaller, quieter, and easier to ignore. Think about how you get paid. That's a flow. Think about how you pay bills. That's a flow. Think about the apps you use, the fuel that powers your city, the data that carries your work. Those are flows too, and flows don't break politely. They tighten, then they tighten again, then they tighten until you feel it in your stomach. Here are the real, inside the empire symptoms you can watch in real time because they show up before the headline collapse. First, delays that get rebranded as normal. One approval takes longer, one settlement slows, one delivery stretches, then language changes. Build in more lead time. That's not planning, that's adaptation to decline. Second, fees that appear everywhere, a surcharge, a premium, a security fee, a processing fee, a risk adjustment. It doesn't look like collapse, it looks like paperwork, but it's the system admitting it's nervous. Third, rules that quietly become stricter. More documents, more screening, more compliance, more verification. When rules tighten, it's because trust is slipping, and when trust slips, flow slows. Fourth, buffers that reappear after years of being cut. Warehouses return, backup suppliers return, extra time returns. People call it resilience. But what they mean is, we got burned. Those are the internal signs. That's what collapse feels like before it earns a dramatic name. Now here's one more uncomfortable truth. A lot of modern power isn't about building, it's about permission. A factory can produce, but production doesn't equal delivery. Delivery needs routes, routes need coverage. Coverage needs finance, finance needs documents, documents need approval. So when people ask, who runs global trade? The answer is rarely the factory owner. It's usually the actors who can say approved or denied without touching the product. That's the permission layer. And that layer is why the world can freeze. Even when workers are working, one bank tightens credit, one insurer reprices a route, one regulator delays exports, one port increases inspections. No huge announcement is needed. The machine slows itself. Now think like an empire. If you can't always control resources, you control gates. If you can't always win on price, you win on access. If you can't always stop your rivals, you make them wait. Waiting is a weapon, and your life runs on gates too. Mortgage approvals, payroll schedules, credit lines, liquidity, settlement, access. So when systems tighten, it doesn't just hit the economy. It hits your timeline, and when your timeline gets squeezed, your choices shrink. That's what dependence does. Now, if you want a clean test for where you stand in the Vise, here it is. It's not inspirational, it's mechanical. The 20% test. If one key flow in your life slows by 20% for 30 days, paychecks, clients, sales, access to credit, deliveries, even internet, do you wobble or do you breathe? If you wobble, you're optimized. If you breathe, you have buffers. And buffers are the real difference between I'm stressed and I'm trapped, because being trapped doesn't mean you failed today. Being trapped means you can't absorb shocks without losing control. That's why the most dangerous phrase in any system is, we can't afford redundancy. It always sounds smart. It always ends badly. Now let's zoom back out, because what you've been hearing isn't just a story, it's a blueprint. Control created speed. Speed created growth. Growth created dependence. Dependence created fragility. And fragility is now being priced in. That's why companies shorten supply chains. That's why governments talk about security more than efficiency. That's why ports, energy routes, and payment rails matter more than speeches. So, if you're wondering what to watch next, don't only watch headlines, watch behavior, watch if inventories rise even when leaders say, everything is fine. Watch if insurers change terms quietly. Watch if banks tighten credit quietly. Watch if temporary measures keep getting extended because the loud collapse comes after the quiet behavior changes. Now I want to give you a mental image you'll remember. An empire is not a castle, it's a schedule. As long as the schedule holds ships arrive, money settles, parts arrive, the empire looks powerful. When the schedule breaks late deliveries, shortages, rising costs, the empire looks weak. Not because enemies got stronger, but because timing got worse. That's why collapse is so confusing from the inside. People are still working. The lights are still on, reports are still being made, but the schedule is slipping, and once the schedule slips, power leaks. So here's the last hook before we end, because I want you to feel what's coming. The next big shock won't look like collapse at first. It will look like a longer wait, a higher premium, a tighter rule, a smaller margin, a gate that says no, faster than it used to. And by the time everyone agrees it's a crisis, the winners will already have moved their flows. So answer me this in the comments seriously. What's the most important flow in your life right now? Money coming in, bills going out, clients, access to credit, job pipeline, business deliveries? Name it, because once you name it, you can see where your gate is. And if you want the next episode, subscribe. Next time we follow one real shipment step by step from factory gate to port queue to insurance clause to bank documents, so you can see exactly where trade turns into control. Because the empires you fear aren't always the ones with armies. Sometimes they're the ones who own the gates, and the moment you see the gates, you start seeing the world clearly. And one more thing before you click away, because this is where people usually fool themselves. Most of us don't notice the vice until it's already tight, because we confuse comfort with control. If shelves are full, we think the system is safe. If the app works, we think the network is stable. If our card goes through, we think the money system is solid, but comfort is not proof. Comfort is just a quiet day. So take the 5 stages you just heard and turn them into a checklist you can run anytime. Control. Who sets the route, the standard, the toll, the schedule? Dependence. What would stop your world if it slowed for a week? Fragility. Where did you cut waste that was actually protection? Pressure. What temporary rule or fee keeps getting extended? Collapse. At what point does the system stop adapting and start blaming? If you can answer those, you're not guessing anymore. You're reading the pattern. Empires don't collapse only on maps, they collapse in invoices, deadlines, and household budgets. So here's your final challenge. Pick one buffer to rebuild this month, not because it sounds nice, because it buys you freedom when the schedule slips. Extra cash, a backup plan, a second client, lower fixed costs, anything that keeps one delay from becoming panic. If this video made you look at trade, money, and daily life differently, hit like so more people see it and subscribe, because the next episode is where we name the modern gatekeepers and show how they quietly decide who moves first when the system tightens. See you in the next one.